I've decided I'm going to be more controversial on this show in 2022.
Yeah, I see that.
There you go.
Hello, welcome to Hat Trick. I'm Jordan Eller Coltman, joined this week by only Elliott Tanti. Elliott, this is becoming a bit of a habit of you and I. Every couple weeks, Braden just leaves us alone to our own devices, and you and I have great conversations without him.
Yeah, I mean, it's almost as though we could just go on the two of us.
No, we love Braden, and Braden's great, but he is busy this week, so we'll have to trudge on without him. We have an awesome episode for you guys this week. Really, really excited. This is something we've been trying to get together for a little while, and we've been trying for just to time it out, and it worked out perfectly availability-wise that we were able to have a very, very special guest join us for the third topic of this week's episode. We're going to talk Olympics. And yeah, our special guest is Alysia Rissling, who is a former Olympic bobsledder. She went to the 2018 games in Korea. She's was a pilot for the Canadian Olympic team. Really, just an amazing story. She's a great storyteller. She's a great ambassador for the sport of bobsled and just the Canadian Olympic movement. And we had a great conversation with her about her journey and her career, because she also just recently, failed to make this year's Olympic team, based a little bit on some bureaucracy we get into, and obviously also the struggles of coming back from an injury. She tore her leg up and had to recover, and then COVID hit, and it just was like 2 years of just slogging it alone in her garage gym. Anyway, she's got an amazing story. The one thing I didn't get to with her that I did want to touch on before we got going, because it's such an awesome story, she's also the very first woman in the world to have piloted an all-female 4-person bobsled. Traditionally, the 4-man bobsled is only competed by men, but that recently changed where they made it basically gender neutral. Women could be in the sled. It's not a man or woman thing. Unfortunately, men are a lot bigger and a lot stronger in that sport, and every major international competition tends to just have 4 men doing it. So anyway, but she was able to pilot the very first 4-man bobsled. So I wanted to put that in there because we touched on it, but we didn't really get to it. There's just so much other stuff we talked about. So she's just a great ambassador. We'll get to that in topic 3. Before we get there, we've got some football to talk about, and then the opening ceremonies in the beginning of the Beijing Olympics. It's a very long intro, so we might as well get to it. Here we go. Topic 1. All right. Before we get to the Olympics, let's talk football, Elliott. There was a very bad game of football played this weekend. I know you want to spend great amounts of detail going into the X's and O's of the Pro Bowl. No, I'm just kidding. Well, let's look ahead to next week. We've got the Super Bowl. No, you don't want to talk about the NHL All-Star game or the Pro Bowl game. They're just not worth discussing. We are going to talk Super Bowl really quickly here. It's just the two of us. So Braden does not get a say in making his picks, but you and I are going to make our Super Bowl picks this week and just sort of tee it up. We have the Bengals. I was given some flack for occasionally pronouncing it Bengals. They are not the Bengals. They're the Bengals. Let's make sure that that's clear. The Cincinnati Bengals versus the Los Angeles Rams, the defensive juggernaut in some of these powerhouse defense players on the Rams, some awesome offenses, the legend of Matt Stafford and his one opportunity here to win a Super Bowl after a very long, very good statistical career that was just snake bitten with a terrible team in Detroit. Here he finds himself on the Rams in year 1, and bam, he's in the Super Bowl. And then obviously the Cinderella story of the year, Joe Burrow in his sophomore season, coming off a bad injury. I mean, he tore up his knee, brings the Cincinnati Bengals all the way to the Super Bowl. They're third in franchise history. They have yet to win one. Elliott, what's the biggest and most exciting storyline for you going into next weekend's Super Bowl?
Oh, it's really tough. That's a really tough question. There's so much going on. And even just like the 3 things that you laid out in the start here sort of articulates that. And this is why we love Super Bowl, right? There are always a million and one. Well, there's like 300 players on each team. So there's so many stories throughout these games. And it's what makes it fun. And this extra week, I used to hate the extra week, but I think giving the teams an extra week of rest, and also, really allowing everyone to really ingest the relationship or digest it really quickly. The matchup is super fun. I mean, I think the story for me has to be the Rams. Obviously playing in their home field. This is the second time that's happened. I know it's happened. This is 2 years in a row, but the second time that's happened. But they also sort of they went for it. They went all in. You always say your team, you have a team, you have a window. It's time to go for it. And they've sold the farm. They've done everything they needed to do, including bringing in Matt Stafford, as you said, putting their faith in him as the QB of this team. And here we are. They're one step away from realizing their dream and their goal. And it seems to me that there's just a lot of momentum and swinginess on their side right now. And what the story will be, either it can only go one of two ways. It's either they've done it, they went all in and they win the game, or they went all in and they lost in the final game. And it's going to be so, that narrative, whatever way it goes, is going to be, I think, the main story that we walk away from next week. And it's really exciting to see.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, the great part of this year's matchup is you've got two teams that, I think there's a lot to root for on both sides. If you're a casual fan of the sport, if you're not a diehard Bengals or Rams fan, as neither of us are, I assume. I know Braden is much more on the Cincinnati bandwagon than either of you or I are. If you're looking for a good game, the playoffs have done nothing but, just outperform week after week how exciting the sport can be. We hope the Super Bowl will be the same. The Super Bowl tends to sometimes be a bit of a clunker after such a great playoffs like this. It's just how sometimes it goes. Let's hope not. The point, though, you got two great teams with great storylines, as you say, and that's what's exciting. You can cheer for either one of them. We know that, leading up to the game, there's always 1,001, storylines, as you put it. And also, just there's going to be feature after feature after feature on every sports center and every, network lineup that leads into the show. They're going to tell you every, human interest story you can imagine. And there's going to be lots to invest in. That's what's exciting about it. When you have a kind of two teams that I don't think that it's fair to say that they didn't expect to be here. I think the Rams definitely went all in to be here, as you say, but the Bengals, this is a great surprise, two great quarterbacks. And that's what's also cool. Two generationally separated quarterbacks, right? We have Matt Stafford, who's, let's say, on the backside of his career, slugged it out in a tough market in Detroit, just couldn't get the Lions over, even with some amazing weapons that he had at one point. Megatron, who's now a Hall of Famer, and Calvin Johnson. He had some great pieces that just couldn't make it work. And now you've got this young upstart gunslinger and a guy who has done nothing but win at every level in Joe Burrow, right? Coming off a national championship with LSU, comes into the NFL with such promise and then gets hurt in his first season. And there's a lot of question marks about what that could have meant for his career. Those question marks are gone now. This guy is a legitimate superstar on the rise in a league full of superstar quarterbacks on the rise. He just happens to be the guy who's found the top of the pyramid here. And it's awesome. And I think it's just really exciting. When you look at it though, could this come down to kickers? Like this every other round seems to have come down to kickers. Who gets the edge on kicking?
Well, this is the thing that worries me, is that every game, it seemed like throughout this entire playoffs have been so close. We're due for a blowout one way or another. We're due for a really shitty game.
Yeah.
But just with the way that the league is, the level of parity, I mean, I don't think either of these two teams, I think the Rams are edged a little bit. But it would be weird. I think a blowout would be not as likely as you might think in sort of has happened in other years. I mean, that's the thing. You got to play the game. You just never know. So I think the breakdown of the quarterbacks is a great way to approach it, Jordan. My question is, I think Matt Stafford has more around him. And I wonder if that's not the difference. When you're getting down to like your third or fourth options, is that not the difference maker there? But heck, it's going to be a great game. Jordan, do you like prop bets?
Yeah, sure. For sure.
My the Super Bowl features what I think is my favorite prop bet in all of sports, and that is, what is the color of the Gatorade that will be poured on the winning coach of the Super Bowl?
You know what my favorite prop is? How long the national anthem takes.
Oh, that's a good one too.
That's the other one. There's always a timer on how long whoever the anthem singer is and how many extra little trills they add to the, and the home of the brave. That's a good one.
Right now, odds for Gatorade, the worst bet is orange at plus 210, lime green yellow second at plus 350, clear or water is at 350, blue and red at 4 and 500, and then purple the least likely.
So how much do you think these people who are really invested in these prop bets spend, like trying to get a hold of the water boy on said team to find out what the preferences of the players on the Rams or the Bengals has been throughout the season? Here's the thing with the Bengals, it's going to look better if it's orange.
So that's one of the things, is that they've never had this happen in history where the Gatorade actually went with the color scheme of the team. So that is not a bad output, bad bet this year. Orange is the most likely one and could match, but that would also mean the Bengals won. And
yeah, right.
Do you want to bet on that?
So,
anyway, sports betting is just ridiculous.
So what was the favorite?
The favorite's orange at plus 210. So
yeah, right. Okay.
Place your money on that. And least likely is red or purple at 500. 5 to 1.
Interesting. I wonder what the history of those are. All right. Let me give you another interesting storyline here, because we've got them full. And it's funny. I listened to on a different podcast, Al Michaels, who's going to call the game. I believe it's his 10th Super Bowl, which is awesome. But, one of those classic American voices of football. He was talking about how, they go into every one of these games with the most unbelievable amount of preparation, right? The writers and the team behind, them with the networks have put together cue cards for every possible scenario, every player. There's history on them going back to, you wouldn't believe. And obviously more information on the more common players you're gonna have to talk about. They know everything about Stafford and Burrow and whatever. But they go down the list, and he was talking about remembering the Super Bowl with the Seahawks and the Patriots, and that great catch at the end by Butler. Butler was like a backup player, and they're digging through cue cards to try to find something about this guy who had just won them the Super Bowl, right? But they've got everything. Here's an interesting one that I just pulled out at random, and I think is interesting. Andrew Whitworth, who's one of the Rams' oldest offensive tackles. He spent most of his career in Cincinnati, right? A guy who toiled away when Cincinnati was terrible. And he's probably the last sort of active bridge in the league between when the Bengals were at their worst, like 5, 6, 7 years ago, and today. So that's an interesting storyline. He's got his opportunity with the Rams. And ironically, his first chance at a Super Bowl is going to be against the team that he toiled away with as an offensive tackle for years and years. And then the other one I think we mentioned on the last show, which maybe we can finish off with here. It's always a quarterback battle, but it's also always a coaching battle. And we got a great storyline with Sean McVay, who's the superstar young, sort of next generation coach that took his team to the Super Bowl a few years ago and just wasn't able to win it. And now he's facing off against Zach Taylor, who is his protege, one of these young guys who came out of his development as an assistant coach. He's a little bit older than him, but regardless, they used to be on the Rams team together. So when you look at the coaching matchup, who do you give the edge to?
I think, you have to circle back to the Rams. I think they've had the most consistent success of the two teams. They've built to this, whereas Cincinnati feels a little bit like, well, they were the underdog in every game up until then. I think we picked them as a collective group once. Maybe we got them twice, once, and then you. And so I think in terms of that consistency and having shown and proven it, you have to give the coaching edge to the Rams. But it's one game. That's the thing, right? Yep. You never know what's going to happen. You know that every trick table play is on the table. These teams will have watched every bit of film on each other, so they're going to be bringing new things. Yeah. And sometimes it's about picking the right play at the right time in the right situation, and it could go either way, right? We could be talking about a play like that being a real a momentum changer in the game, and great.
Well, and as you said last week too, I think that, we credited the Rams with a very good game against the 49ers, but the 49ers also did themselves no favors, especially there in the second half. And when you look at the one mistake you could say Sean McVay made during that game, it was he made a couple really bold choices to challenge plays and gave up timeouts. He lost 2 of them, and then they had to call an early timeout because of a personnel issue. And he went into that final, half of a quarter without any opportunity to stop the clock had he needed to. Luckily for him, Jimmy Garoppolo and the 49ers just didn't have enough in the tank to figure out a way to get close. But we know Joe Burrow has come down the stretch here multiple times in the playoffs and looked really good. So it would be interesting to see if Sean McVay is as cavalier with his challenges in the Super Bowl. I mean, obviously you've got nothing left to lose. You got to throw everything at them. But if you get caught with some early opportunities to lose some timeouts, that could be something to watch for. I don't know if it'll happen again, but you never know.
Controlling the clock is always key in the NFL. It's very different from the CFL in that way. And the only way to do it is really through play calling to some extent, but really it's timeouts. The one thing I will say, the Rams are an incredibly disciplined team too.
Yes, they are.
And that I think, that will be something to watch. Maybe that's a differentiator in terms of number of penalties that they take, particularly like the dumb offside ones and procedures and things like that. Like, if there's one advantage there from coaching, I'd look at it's probably how well disciplined the Rams are this year.
So let's just before we make our picks really quickly, how on a scale of like 1 to 5, how likely are you to sit and actually watch the halftime show, considering it is some old rap and hip hop legends instead of sort of modern day pop something other? You've got Snoop Dogg and Dr. Dre, Kendrick Lamar, Mary J. Blige, and Eminem. How does that boy from the 90s feel about that?
Well, I think, it's sort of interesting because we sort of have a Super Bowl tradition in the house where my dad and sister want nothing to do with the game. And so don't watch the game or don't invest in the game whatsoever, but then do come out for the halftime show. And that's when my mom and I will go away and prepare dinner and then bring it out. So I will have like a weird, I am actually more inclined to watch it this time.
Yeah.
And there's always surprises at Super Bowl halftime shows too. So I'm very interested to see that. And this is sort of a nod to diversity, and it's not a not so subtle one indeed, but I wonder if there isn't a controversial statement or two made that comes across. Look, it wouldn't be a great Super Bowl unless there was some controversy around the halftime show. Let me just say that.
Okay, let's make our predictions here. We don't have Braden to make a prediction, so he doesn't get a say. Maybe he can shout it out on Twitter, but you and I are going to go for this. I will go first because I made my prediction 2 rounds ago. I said the LA Rams were going to be in the Super Bowl, and I said they were probably going to win it. I stand by that. Sam Darnold, Von Miller, just a terrifying defense that when they are on their game is hard to play. They're going to pressure Joe Burrow. I think it's probably the best defense he'll have seen in the playoffs, and I stand by that. I also think offensively, Matt Stafford has looked really, really good. He has that experience level. Now, no, he has never been in this game. I know that, but neither of these quarterbacks have. I still like the advantage. He's at home. He'll probably be able to hear his team will be able to hear his snap count a little bit easier. Hopefully, it is a loud building, but I think he'll be in a better shape than he was last week when he had a lot of 49ers fans in there making it harder on him. I'm sure there'll be Bengals fans, but not as many. And then you've got the best wide receiver in the league in Cooper Kupp out there to make some big catches. And then Odell Beckham Jr., who's looked good through the playoffs too. He's got threats. He's got offensive and defensive going. And you've got a great coach in Sean McVay, who's been here once before and once been really bad. I stand by my pick. It's the Rams winning the Super Bowl. Elliott?
Yeah, I think that's, I think for all those reasons, that's the safe pick. I'm going to go with Cincinnati. And the reason why I'm going to go with Cincinnati is because I think the Rams have been a little bit too consistent throughout the playoffs. Things have gone a little too well for them. And I wonder, the game in and of itself, the longer halftime show, there will be just things that will get in the way of the consistency that they've gotten used to. And I wonder if that team doesn't face a little bit of adversity, if maybe Cincinnati might not surprise us all and pull it out. So I'm going to take Cincinnati. But the way I see this game going is Cincinnati getting ahead early, and then the Rams tightening it up close, and then it's a coin flip at the end.
All right, well, we've each got one, so one of us will win and one of us will lose, but hopefully we both win on the halftime show. I hope it's as good as we all hope it will be. And either way, let's just hope for a good game.
Are we going to pick the Gatorade or what?
Yeah. All right, let's pick the Gatorade. What's your? I personally think I'm going to go with blue.
I'm going to go with clear/water.
Water? Oh boy, what's the line on water? Is that a thing anymore?
It's about the same as blue. Like, this is all a crapshoot, Jordan.
Okay, copy that. I take blue. Elliott takes clear. Good old high quality H2O. And we'll go with that for now. All right. That's topic one. Hey, if you're a fan of Hat Trick Sports, then I promise you're going to love the Backyard Basketball Podcast. Hat Trick's very own Braden Dollar-Coltman sits down every Wednesday with his best bud, Christian Steck. And together, they break down all the news, rumors, transactions from around the basketball world. Whether it's the NBA or college hoops, these two guys love talking basketball, and you are going to love listening every Wednesday on the Backyard Basketball Podcast. All right, topic two is actually going to lead us into our great conversation with Alysia Rissling in our third block. But let's just quickly talk about the Olympics ourselves. They are underway in Beijing, China. The Olympic opening ceremony is taking place in the middle of the night on Friday. If you're watching it in local time, that is always a struggle. We did talk about that previously. Like, it's hard when the Olympics are in Asia or they're somewhere sort of around the globe, because it makes it harder to watch things live when they're in prime time. Luckily, we do get that window of time. If it's a morning event in like local Chinese time, it would be a morning event, but we get, they start to pick up on TV around like 5 p.m. or 6 p.m. Here in North America. So sometimes you get something to watch early, but it's kind of its own struggle. But anyway, they are underway. Look, lots of controversy always, as there always is around the Olympics. China, human rights issues. We've heard about it. We know about it. The genocide of the Uyghurs going on. The UN has declared it as such. And so there's lots of things that go into this. The Olympics have always been political. They're always attached to it. But I think that, for me personally, we had this similar issue in the summer. The challenge I think that I have with it, and maybe Elliott, you want to speak to this for yourself, but the challenge with the Olympics is always that, like, it is the pinnacle of athletic competition for so many very unique sports that we don't see in a lot of other places. Obviously, just in the mainstream, we do see the big sports get to be there. Basketball in the summer and hockey goes in the winter, and those kind of sports. And if you're in Canada, we watch a lot of curling and whatnot throughout the year. However, the Olympics are special in that there's a lot of these athletes who have dedicated themselves to these sports, and it's the pinnacle, right? It's very hard for these athletes to compete with it. Alysia will talk about this in our interview. She talks about the struggles that athletes have gone through to get to this place, and then that juxtaposed with the political, bureaucratic part of the Olympics as a business and as a sponsorship-led organization it can be kind of uncomfortable sometimes, I think, to unpack. How are you feeling about the Olympics right now, Elliott? Are you excited to watch the Olympics? Do you feel kind of mixed about it? Where are you on the Olympics right now?
I think if you hadn't sent a text message on Friday about this show and reminded me that the Olympics are going on, I wouldn't have actually known that they were taking place. Wow. And I think that speaks to my level of apathy around these games on a bunch of different fronts. I mean, one, I think is, we just got done with the Summer Olympics, and
timing wise, it's weird, right? Yeah,
it's weird, right? Some of it's that. I think the time difference does a number on interest in general for me, and it's just a challenge, right? Nothing you can do about it, but the time difference does really impact things. Not being able to watch things live, or waking up to news, just not that interesting. I think the lack of NHL participation has really damaged my interest in the games as well. That was best on best. It's the best hockey. There's always great stories, amazing rivalries. That has fallen away and disappeared. And then on top of that, layered on this is sort of this immense frustration that these games are occurring at all, given the state of health and safety in our world, and they're occurring in a place that is literally committing genocide on a people right now. And there's expectation that we all just like turn a blind eye. Well, this autocratic state is using these games as a PR boost for a country with an awful human rights record that's only gotten worse. And so all of those things lumped together have really impacted my interest or care or desire to partake or even talk about these games or be engaged with them. I mean, I forced myself to turn on the TV today because I knew we had a show tonight. But that's not generally how I've looked at the Olympics, particularly Winter Olympics in the past. Generally, it's been something I've been excited about. I am not there. And I don't know if this is, and it's just because of the Madrid of different issues related to it. And like, I take your point. And in fact, I think I delivered a very similar point 6 months ago or 8 months ago when we were talking about the Summer Olympics. But even to the extent of supporting amateur athletes in these games, that is a laudable goal and something to be thinking about. But even for me, I struggle to justify even with that as a great excuse to watch because of just the horrendous situation that we're in. No one wanted to host these games. They basically had to give them to China. Like I'm at this point in history, we're having a really serious debate, and there's a rivalry emerging between autocratic states and democratic states, and why we would give a nation like China an opportunity to sort of just look the other way for a little bit because they're hosting a sporting event. For me, I'm really struggling to find a justification for it, and it's definitely impacting my viewership. And I bet you viewership across Canada is down. The other thing I just want to say, and I know I've been going for a while here, but watching it today, the Olympics are basically unwatchable. They are packed full of commercials. You spend as much time watching, the Toyota Olympic car commercial as you do the actual games and events that are going on. Clearly, the broadcasting is disrupted by COVID. They do their best, and there's some old names that have been around for a long time that are sort of your Olympic people, for CBC, I think of like Armitage and others. But even still, the product itself is virtually unwatchable because so much of the resources, the time resource, is devoted to advertisement, and there's advertisement everywhere. That was just for me today, forcing myself to turn it on, and just I spent half the time watching commercials. I was like, what are we doing here?
Well, okay, so there's a few things to unpack. I'm not going to argue with you too much on the politics side of it because I think I've been pretty upfront about saying I think that the Olympics and the Olympic movement has a myriad of problems. A Madrid, I believe, of problems. I've never heard that term, but I like it.
I think it's myriad. I think I confuse the city and the.
Okay. Well, Madrid is fun too. Anyway, regardless, they have. I mean, look, it's a corrupt and very messy organization, just as FIFA is, just as you could argue most professional sports in North America are, certainly in their own ways, right? Because again, they're run predominantly with money. And that goes to what you're talking about with the television part of it. I think, to be fair, we just spend a good 15, 20 minutes talking about a football game that's going to be about at least 60-40 commercials when you watch it in the end.
But the commercials are actually good in the Super Bowl.
Okay, so the quality of the advertising aside, sports is expensive to put on television. Let's just agree on that. I agree with your point. I just think, we're living in 2022. We should be expecting that half the look at the best part is most of it's at night. If you PVR it, you can skip all the commercials. That's what I've been doing. It's great. I've watched commercial free snowboarding and figure skating and whatever else. I said it off the top, and I do want to stand by it. I believe that it is more and more evident that there is a dichotomy between what the idealism of the Olympic movement is and the reality of what the Olympic movement is. There is a huge gap there, right? We are talking about amateur sport, a lot of athletes who are sacrificing a lot to get to these places. You're bringing up hockey and you're bringing up other sports where, again, these people, predominantly the men, get a lot of infrastructure supporting them. We just don't see that in these other sports, right? We're going to, like I said, again, we're talking to an athlete in moments from now in the third topic who in their sport, they are not only the athlete, but they are their own driver. They are their own technician. They have to maintain and build the bobsled. In her case, you had to buy her own bobsled. These are people who have dedicated themselves to a pursuit of something that is so fleeting. Most of them will only ever get to one Olympics. So for me, I really have, I think, gotten to a place where I am comfortable separating the two because I'm thinking about it in two different ways. I agree with you. China should never have had these games. It's fascinating when you look at it from like a geopolitical perspective. I assume you didn't watch the opening ceremonies because of this. I watched the opening ceremonies, and the dichotomy between the grandiose sort of over-the-top monolithic opening ceremonies we saw only a few years ago when Beijing hosted the Summer Games. Fascinating to see the difference in like the political visual language of this games. Everything was about minimalism. There was no military element. There was no big, huge scale production. There was a lot of projection and a lot of video content, but it wasn't the sort of massive, I don't know, like patriotic act that the last one we saw was. And I think that that's intentional. I think China is aware that the eyes are on them, and they are definitely using this as a propaganda tool to say, look at how much softer and more sort of like, aware of our global image we are. I get that. That's politics, right? But I think for me, as a Canadian who has gone through a bit of a struggle with my own patriotism recently, to try to figure out what it means to be Canadian and to be patriotic about a country that has a lot of skeletons in the closet that we are becoming more and more comfortable discussing, I think. And even still not. I mean, we've got truckers and protests going on across this country that are continuing to sort of stoke division. I think that there is an opportunity in the Olympics to focus in on the personal side of it. So let me just give you one example, right? After the opening ceremony, CBC aired a brief interview with an athlete named Jennifer Hockrig, okay, who's a 25-year-old snowboarder, grew up just outside Toronto. And, they shared a story of her having written herself a letter when she was in grade 7. She wrote herself a letter. It was a class project where you basically wrote yourself a letter you were going to read when you were in grade 12. Sort of, where do you think you'll be and what your ambitions are? And, and she wrote, I'm in grade 7 right now. I can't wait till the rest of the year goes by. I'm on the field hockey team and I'm going to try out for the volleyball team. Outside school, I play hockey, snowboard race, soccer, and basketball. My dream is to go to the Olympics, but it probably won't happen. That's what she wrote for herself. This is a woman who is at her very first Olympics. This is a lifelong dream. She graduated from high school, went into the national, development program for snowboarding. She has worked really, really hard to get to where she is, and she's at the Olympics. I'm incredibly proud of her sacrifice to get there. I watched this interview, and they surprised her by bringing on her parents. Now, I'm the parent of a young kid, and it hit me maybe differently this year than it's ever hit me before. But I watched the pride and the joy that these two parents had sharing a lifelong dream with their daughter, right? And I think what's hard is that dream is sincere. That dream is legitimate. It should be recognized and celebrated. And I am proud of all of the athletes who have dedicated themselves to that from every country, and there's amazing stories. This is just one. You can go through every single one of them. There's a journey to get there, right? With maybe the exception of like Eric Stahl, who had a great NHL career, just happened to not be on a team and is captain of the hockey team because the NHL didn't go. Maybe with the exception of that. Regardless, most of these people are competing completely in obscurity for most of their lives. And I'm proud of them for that. So for me, maybe I'm rationalizing. Maybe I'm doing some kind of compartmentalizing like we did talk about recently on another show. But for me, I'm proud of them, and I want to share in their joy and excitement and their journey.
And I think your points are well made. And I wouldn't, I don't. My intention is not to knock you for your position on it and wanting to engage it, because I do. Yeah, I mean, you spoke to an Olympic athlete today, right? Like there is a. That's a really unique and special thing. And clearly, in order to make it to the Olympics, like you said, like you have to decide from a very early age that this is something that you want to do. And this is something, I guess for me, and I don't know if this is Elliott, but it feels like it's more societal, where the games don't hold the cachet that they used to. I think we're starting to see through it. In really meaningful ways, based on where they're hosting their games, the relationship with money and sponsorship, and also just the vibe and attitude about it. I don't know that it means the same thing that it used to. And it's interesting you mentioned being a dad, because my next question was to you, was that if you were fit, is that if your child came to you and said, I want to be an amateur athlete and I want to go and compete in the Olympics, is that something that you would want for your child now? And I won't speak for you, but I'll speak for me in my place. I don't know that I'd want them to do it. Not just because of the hardship or the financial burden, but because it's chasing a glory that I don't think exists anymore, or that is going away. And I think the games have lost the plot. And unfortunately, and you know, our athletes, they are remarkable people, and they're achieving a lifelong dream just by even being there. And I don't want to knock them for that. This is not directed towards them, but I just don't know that the games mean what they used to mean anymore. It was always a little bit hokey about bringing countries together in sport, but it seemed to mean a lot more. That seemed to mean a lot more before, and now it's about which country can we take for the most money to build venues so that we can hold this thing so that we can all get rich. And I just don't feel the same attachment to the games anymore, and I don't think that their culture is relevant. And I think that's unfortunate for the participants. They're the ones that are hurt the most in that. But that's how I feel. And I think there's lots of people that are feeling that way.
Yeah, I don't know. I think it's interesting. I don't know if I agree that it has lost something. I think that it has definitely shifted, and perhaps the conversations have shifted because of just where we are as a society, or in North America, the other things that we're prioritizing. And that's probably a good thing. I don't think that it's bad that the perspective on the games has changed, that maybe a little bit of sort of the like fake veneer of the quote unquote Olympic movement has come off a little bit, and we're a little bit more critical of it. I think there's value in that. But again, I think that there's a couple different parts of it, like, and maybe you're right. Maybe we can't separate them, but maybe that's okay. I don't know. I think back to even Vancouver, and I remember like in the lead up to the Vancouver Olympics, even in this country, there was this real sort of struggle with like admitting that like it was okay to be patriotic and it was okay to support our team. And I remember, and this is so strange, but I remember Stephen Harper at the time, who was the prime minister, coming onto the floor of the House of Commons and actually like, declaring an opportunity, encouraging Canadians to let go a little bit of their traditional politeness and show a little bit more emotion and support. And over time as the games progressed, I think people did that because there was some great storylines and there was some opportunity. I think that there's an opportunity in the big ideal of the Olympics for it to still be a unifying thing. I just think that you're right, that there's this huge contradiction occurring because we're seeing the problems more evident. Here's what I would offer back. I think that there is some evidence to suggest that change is coming. The challenge is always like these things are scheduled half a decade before they end up going somewhere, right? There's no way to sort of change it once the cycle started. Unfortunately, a decision was made, as you said, maybe there was no one else who wanted it. Beijing gets the games, and of course that's where we're going. Same as it was with Sochi, which was clearly also a political move by Putin and the Russians. This is Xi Jinping's opportunity to sort of use the platform of the Olympics. But, we've heard recently that there is a bid being developed here in Canada to bring the Olympic Games back to Vancouver, Whistler, and Squamish, and it's being 100% led by Indigenous leaders. It's going to be an Indigenous bid, not a national bid, not a Canadian bid. It's got a little bit of obviously support from the province because, it's on their some of their land, and there's the financial elements that go into that. But the nations of the Squamish, the Musqueam, and Tsleil-Waututh are working together as a organizing committee to actually put forward Canada's first Indigenous bid. And I think that that's a really fascinating story to see how it unfolds. And if that's the future of where these games go, where opportunities for minority groups and opportunities for parts of, quote unquote nations that haven't been represented properly get that opportunity. There was obviously a lot of criticism when the Olympics were here in Vancouver that the Indigenous population wasn't included enough. And here's an opportunity for them now to own that. That's fascinating to me. That's the opportunity that's there. I guess I'll just put that back out there as we sort of round this out. And for me, I think I do. I just separate both parts of it. I think that the athletes, I don't know. I don't think the athletes have ever been given enough of a voice to really be equal partners in how this goes. That's part of it too. But that's maybe why I'm also more sympathetic to their side of it.
Yeah, and my criticisms are certainly not leveled at the athletes.
No.
And I know that, but I want to reiterate it. And I think your final point there around, an Indigenous-led games, there's an opportunity there for sure. But then I think back, so then we're putting like an Indigenous community to the same, we're holding them to the same stature of, an autocratic, genocide committing regime. And, we're equating those two things with the similar value. And I guess some of this for me is like where the last few games been held. I mean, Japan was Japan, right? So that's different. But, I'm thinking about Sochi and Russia and now China and just the role that they're playing in the international realm.
But that's not new, Elliott. That's not new. Berlin hosted the games when the Nazis were in control.
This is what I mean. Like even when we were talking about Russia, I mean, we were having an ongoing conversation while Putin was saying there's no gay people in Russia and anyone that is should be killed.
No, and I agree with you.
And it's like, like Canada's not perfect, but come on, like this is. This is so I get that. I just really struggle. I think the games have lost their stature with me. And I think that's probably coming out in this conversation more than anything. And I don't know that I am not part of a substantial minority, if not majority of people who used to be really invested in the games. I just do not have the same interest, and it hurts ultimately it hurts the athlete. And I know that in saying that, but I'm really struggling with this one. And some of this is part of that conversation from a week ago or 2 weeks ago around the compartmentalization. Like if I'm going to start calling things a spade, then I need to be consistent in that. And then I have some harder choices that I need to make around my investment in NFL football, investment in the NHL. I mean, we didn't even get to the Chicago Blackhawks this week, and MLB and all these other things as well too. And so I recognize that as well, but maybe it's 2022. Maybe it's just this week I'm in a bad mood, but I'm just not, just not there.
Well, maybe I'll finish it this way, because you did also talk about whether or not I'd feel comfortable with my son wanting to pursue, an Olympic sport. And I'll put it this way. This is the first time I think he's been old enough to be able to like watch or understand what's going on. We've had the TV on, and the one thing I do love about the Olympic broadcast, aside from the commercials, is that if you flip it on and just leave it on, you're going to get a whole bunch of little tastes of different things, right? And if you aren't a avid curler fan or an avid figure skating fan, you just get a little taste of it. You don't necessarily know who the athletes are, and you follow along. Curling was on. Lowen walks in the room and he goes, "Daddy, what's that?" And I said, "That's curling. It's a sport." And he watches it for about 5, 10, 15 seconds. Then he looks at me and goes, "No, they're cleaning." Because all he sees is a couple of guys with brooms, polishing the ice. And I thought, what beautiful innocence that he's being introduced to a completely new sport. And his first perspective is they're doing housework. Anyway, that's my anecdote and my little positive note for us to end it on for you. Well, I mean, I appreciate your candor. I appreciate your honesty. I think that's important. We've always done that on this show. And I guess we'll see what happens. Maybe in a week and a half, we'll be talking about the Olympics again, and
I'll have Canada tattoos on my forehead.
You'll be fully invested as the, unknown male hockey team gets to the gold medal game or something under the leadership of, NHL legend Eric Stahl. All right. Well, in a moment, we'll have our conversation with Alysia. It's a great conversation about what it's like to be an athlete. I think it is very on point for the conversations we've been having, and sort of the perspectives of I don't know, just the separation of what it takes to actually get to that level of competition. Because I think you'll agree with me, Elliott, that regardless of the politics of it, the Olympics is still the pinnacle for most of these sports. And I think that still, that still holds true. Sure. All right. That's topic 2.
Hey, topic 3 this week is brought to us by Roma Pizza and Donair. We all know that the best thing about Edmonton is the many Donair options. And I know if you're like me, it can be overwhelming and stressful trying to hunt down the best. Well, my friends, we have found it, and it's time you did too. Roma Pizza and Donair in Westbrook, Aspen Gardens is Edmonton's best kept secret. There's nothing quite like piping hot meat getting shaved and served with a generous ratio of sweet sauce. And look, I know someone out there is saying, yeah, no, that's not really my thing. Well, hold your horses, because there is more. Roma Pizza and Donair not only serves Edmonton's best donair, but they also offer Roma pizzas, dinner platters, chicken wings, chicken fingers, chicken nuggets, chicken tawuk, burgers, salads, subs, baklava, coconut cake, and with summer right around the snow-covered corner, they also have summer specials, deep-fried pickles and deep-fried Oreos. But hey, don't take my word for it. Sometimes tasting is believing. To order, call them at 780-944-9696. That's 780-944-9696. They're open every day except Sunday from 11 until 11 and open till midnight Friday and Saturday. You can also follow them on Instagram at Roma Pizza Donaire.
Okay, so as promised, very special guest here joining us for the third topic of Hat Trick this week. I have Alysia Rissling, who is an Olympian, a Canadian Olympian. She was in the 2018 games. She joins us from Calgary. First off, thanks so much for being here, Alysia. How are you?
I'm great. Thank you so much for having me.
So I gave a little tease off the very top of the show about sort of your CV, but just for those who may have just jumped ahead in the show because they were excited to see you as a guest here, you are a bobsled athlete from Canada who has been to the Olympics, recently, unfortunately, suffering an injury that I know held you back from training for about a year, and then of course COVID and all of that, and unfortunately just missing out on being in the Olympics this year. We will talk about that. I'm sure that that's very disappointing. However, what an amazing accomplishment or an accomplished career you've had. I went back and looked through, and I know that you've become an ambassador for the sport, ambassador for women in the sport, but you're also just a decorated athlete to begin with. We'll get to all of that, but let's go back just to the beginning. I know you come from an athletic family. You know, your brother's a hockey player. I know your dad was a hockey player. You've got family members and everything. Growing up for you, sports was really an important part of life, wasn't it?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. My dad's side of the family were huge sports freaks. So my grandpa's in the South Alberta slow pitch or fast pitch Hall of Fame. Sorry. My grandma was in the ice capade. She was a traveling ice dancer.
Wow.
So I was on skates from 2 years old, and my dad played pro hockey, played it was called the IHL back then. And they played pro in Europe, and my little brother, of course, played for the Hitmen for 5 years, and then played in the pro through the farm systems in the US, and then played a year overseas as well. And now he's playing for Nate. So I'd say I'm more of a hockey family first, but unfortunately I didn't play hockey. It was like the one sport that I begged to play that they didn't put me in. They put me in everything else, and I played everything else all the way through high school, where I had scholarship offers in 4 different sports.
Yeah, and I know you ended up going to the University of Alberta for basketball and track. Is that right?
That is correct. Yeah.
And you guys got all the way to a national championship, did you not?
My first year, we lost in the national final by 4. Still hurts.
I bet it
and we
does,
went to the tournament 3 out of 5 years as well.
But just an amazing accomplishment there, right? And
Absolutely.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but like bobsleigh was never on your sort of like list of life goals growing up as a kid. Was it a sport that you were interested in, or did that kind of come later?
Women didn't compete in the Olympics in bobsled until 2002. So absolutely, it was never on my radar. I never even heard of it. I knew nothing about it. And I didn't watch Cool Runnings until I was older. I don't know how I missed out on that one. But yeah, no, it was definitely nothing that even crossed my mind until it would have been, 2010 when they did an identification camp with some of the track and field athletes at U of A. And I just I wasn't on the track team anymore because I had quit just to focus solely on basketball. And I kind of asked if I could go through the thing and the ID camp. And then Canada went on to do incredibly well in the 2010 Olympics. And I was like, oh, we're good at this sport. Maybe this is something that would be kind of cool to do.
Totally. Going back to 2002 for a second, I have another family connection with you. I know we mentioned off the top of the show that I know your father, but I believe I was in the room with your dad when you were with Kevin Lowe's kids when they won the gold medal. Were you babysitting their kids that night when the men won the gold medal? Do you remember that?
In 2010?
No, in 2002.
Oh, 2002. Oh,
Salt Lake City.
I was. Yes.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. No, I was like, because in 2010, all the kids were in.
No, exactly. No. Salt Lake City,
yeah.
They win their first gold, right? I was with your dad. Yeah. He was so excited. And I remember he actually called. He may have called you, but he ended up calling Kevin out there watching the Olympics. So goes back to that you've been around the Olympics, even if you didn't know you were going to end up there right from the beginning, eh?
Yeah, I've been around a lot of it. I've been very fortunate to have some pretty incredible role models.
So let's jump back into your career. Once you sort of realized bobsleigh was an actual option or as a sport you wanted to pursue, what was that journey like? How did you transition from being a basketball player and a track athlete? Like, how does one become a bobsledder?
Every single person who enters the sport of bobsled has a very unique story because, again, it's not a sport you grow up doing unless you're like your family's deep into it. And there's a couple athletes on tour. There's a German and an American that like kind of like are bloodline of bobsledders, but everyone else kind of like gets thrown into it from something else. So we have a lot of players that come from football backgrounds, a lot from rugby, and then a lot from track and field. Those are kind of the top three in Canada, especially that get recruited. The American will recruit military and like special ops, which are because they're all like in like fantastic peak condition. But the crazy thing about bobsled is you have to be this unicorn because you have to be as fast in the first 30 meters as a 100-meter sprinter, but you have to be as strong as the strongest Olympic weightlifter there is because we're pushing a bobsled that weighs like 400 pounds. So I always like was a power athlete. Like in basketball, I was not the best shooter. I was an all around good athlete. And I loved training. Like I loved lifting weights and I loved sprinting. So like that kind of correlated really well for me. And that's why I wanted to get in, but my journey wasn't easy because I entered the sport. I graduated from university and I took actually a year off and I applied to get into a master's program first that I didn't get into. It was med school. I needed a new goal. So I needed something to focus on. And I had actually not been in a gym in 14 months when I first did my first initial Alberta bobsled recruitment camp. So I spent a year as a brakeman with Team Alberta. And that was more like a year of like learning about the sport. I had to learn how you win and lost races. I had to learn how you took care of the sleds. I had to learn like everything. I knew nothing about it other than you just go down in a bobsled track, like down a track. That's all I knew. And I just fell in love with it in that first year. And that's when I really decided that if I was going to commit some time and effort into this and I wanted to become an Olympian, I was going to have to do it from the front seat because I knew I was never going to be the fastest or strongest athlete that comes out to this program. It just wasn't in my genetics. So I was going to have to learn the skill of actually driving the sled, and that would kind of more give me a better opportunity to qualify my sled for the Olympics. So the next year I was on Team Alberta again, and I was just learning how to drive the sled, and I practiced and practiced and practiced. And then the next year I came back and I actually got myself finally into some sort of physical conditioning so that I was able to crack the national development team. And kind of just moved up the ranks from there until I was full-time on the World Cup, the 2016-17 season. So the year before the 2018 Olympics.
So obviously, you have to really commit yourself fully to the sport, but this isn't just an athletic sport. This is one of those sports where you have to maintain your own equipment. You've got to sort of, slug it. We've talked on this show a lot about sort of the struggles that some of these Olympic sports have in the off years. What is it like in sort of that 4-year window when you're preparing between Olympics, or in your case, the very first time when you were preparing for an Olympics, when, you've obviously got competitions throughout all those seasons, but the Olympics is the ultimate goal for a sport like bobsleigh, is it not?
Yeah, it absolutely is. And like everyone gears up to peak in that 4th year, but it still requires so much time and effort and skill from the 4 years leading up to it, because we only get to do the World Cup circuit is eight races a year, with the last race of the year being the World Championships. Whereas like in an Olympic season, it's 8 races and then the Olympics. So there's so much effort that goes into him being an amateur athlete. And I wasn't carded, which carding is the structure that the government helps athletes out. And so I was a development card. So that's $900 a month. That didn't even cover my rent. So like trying to travel, and in bobsled, we have to go to where the tracks are. So of course, luckily enough, like the Calgary track was around when I was going through my development, but it's not around anymore. So now all these athletes that want to get into it, it's like they have to go to Whistler. Whistler's super expensive to stay. Like you're looking at over $100 a night just for accommodations. Or you're going to Park City, Utah, or you're going to Lake Placid, New York. There's so much travel that's involved. And in Europe, the very different thing is there's so many tracks that they could just drive 3 hours and get to a new track. Here, it's like, it's the closest track to drive to is 14 hours away, or I guess Whistler's only 12, but still you're looking like at a huge span. So that's why the Europeans are at a huge advantage for that. So I was trying to travel, but I was still trying to work to support myself. And I remember being on that national development team my first year, and my team fee was $7,000. and I was on my own for food when we were on the road, and I had maxed out my credit card, I had maxed out my line of credit, and I had withdrawn more from my bank account. And it was literally like I still was paying rent back in Calgary, and I had been on the road for 3 months. And I remember I was like, which family member am I going to have to call to pay my rent this month? Like, and that's when I got my first sponsorship. Like, it couldn't come through at the first, like, and it was, I will never forget, it was $2,500, and I cried. Like, it was just like, because it at least gave me some leeway to get through. And then I ended up getting one shortly after that. So, I worked my butt off I actually worked in the bars in the restaurant industry, because it was the most amount of money I could make in the least amount of time. But those are very physical jobs. And so trying to train full time and then going to work where I'm getting 20,000 steps in because I'm running drinks around and and staying up till 5 o'clock in the morning sometimes.
Yeah, tough hours.
Yeah. Yeah. And I just had to do what I had to do. But when my team expenses, I don't think there was a year that I spent less than, I don't want to put a number on it, but I think if I look back, most of the years in bobsled, I spent at least $14,000 on bobsled. And if you would have told me the cost that would have been associated, I would have never gotten into it. So I'm kind of glad I went in blind, because I just would have quit then, because I was thinking about picking up hockey when I got into bobsled, and I was like, no, that's too expensive. I didn't know that I was going to go on to purchase my own bobsled at $91,000, so it just, but when you're in it that far and you're so close to your Olympic dream and you just want to prove that you deserve to be there and you want to be competitive, you do what you have to do and unfortunately in my sport, it's not just about your physical performance, it's also about your equipment.
Yeah. And I think that's a great perspective that I think most people, especially, in this country or frankly everywhere, miss or don't think about with these quote unquote sort of Olympic focused sports, right? We know there's a development program that for hockey, there's thousands of kids playing hockey across this country because there's a professional league and there's all these things. But you think about the sacrifice of those athletes, and we've talked on this show and other places, like the Olympics carry with them some controversy and some baggage because of the bureaucracy and the political factors that go into this. And those shouldn't be overlooked, I think. But the thing we've also talked about is that you have to sometimes separate the Olympics from the athletes and the reality of the struggle some of these athletes have gone through, like in your case, financially, but also just like, you've said it, you have to dedicate yourself so deeply to a pursuit of something that you may never get to. I mean, that must have been the hardest part. Let's talk about that for a second, because I know you've suffered a huge disappointment this season. You're not currently in China. You're talking to us. I'm sure that was heartbreaking, but you went through a crazy journey to get even just back into shape to do that. You suffered an injury and COVID. Talk to me about the last 2 years and how we got to where we got to, because I know that it was, again, some bureaucracy involved.
Oh, there always is. I mean, there's politics in every sport. So after 2018, then the next season, we had a home world championships, and we did a really weird season. So we had a home world championships in Whistler, and there is no scarier track in the world than Whistler when it's -5 and sunny. Like, it's just like, we go so much faster in Whistler than anywhere else that it was a tough year. And for whatever reason, Whistler had the coldest, crispest winter that we hosted. So we set the speed record, the men's, there was a British 4-man team that went 156 kilometers an hour, which is just like insane. Like, you're free falling going that fast essentially. And not only that, in Whistler at the bottom of the track, like, you have to make your steers perfect, because there's a corner called 50-50. And if you're not perfect there, you flip, and like crashing going over 100 and crashing at any time sucks, but crashing going at that speed is just, it's like, it exasperates everything. Like, it hurts. Like, and so that season, it's funny, I had never crashed in that corner ever in my entire career. Like, learning to drive sled, I would make mistakes. I crashed in multiple corners, but I never crashed in 50-50. And for whatever reason that year, I crashed 7 times in that corner. And it became such a big thing for me that it was a form of PTSD. So I had that going on. I got to leave the track a little bit, but then I went to Europe and had some good results, had a gold medal in the Europa Cup and a bronze, and came back, and we were going to spend more time in Whistler because we were going to get ready for hosting our worlds. And I tore my calf, like a 7 centimeter tear in my calf. and this was 5 weeks out from Worlds. I spent that whole 5 weeks in a walking cast. And so I was not doing any sprinting. I couldn't really do any heavy lifting because you need your calf for everything. And I was just trying to heal enough so that maybe I could start outside the sled in the race. So that pretty much knew my world champs were over in that fact. And I did push, but I got held in Whistler and I kept crashing. So that kind of messed with my mental ability. So I'd say that year, when I finished that year, like, I almost quit then, because I was finishing that year. It was a Whistler World Champs. I was expected to win. And I came 11th. And now I have PTSD, diagnosed PTSD, and I have a calf that just won't seem to heal. And I found out after, when I got an MRI later, that it actually had healed kind of off centered. So instead of like going exactly back where the tear was, it kind of healed at an angle. So I had this like debilitating tendinitis, which is such a soft injury. And I see that in my thing because it's like such a thing, but I could not make it through a sprint workout for 14 months. So now we're heading into the next season, and it's literally tryouts. And I never sprinted once the entire summer. I couldn't do it. Like, I tried, I went to track practice every day, and every day I tried, and I never made it. I was going to physio 3 times a week. My injury bill cost me $8,000 because I ran out of insurance so quickly. And I was so determined to like heal. So I was doing everything. I was doing red light therapy. I was doing injections. I was doing all these things that I was paying personally out of pocket. And I got told literally the week of tryouts that in October that, we're going to offer you an injury card. So an injury card means we recommend you take this season off, you heal completely, and you come back, because if you don't come back in good form, you don't have a spot here anymore. Because now we've got these up and comers coming, and we need you to be in the best shape possible for the Olympic Games. And I said, you know what, that's a good idea. It's year 2 of the quad. Let's just like kind of tear this thing down, rebuild from the foundation up, and come back in the best shape ever for 2022. Enter global pandemic.
Yeah. No one saw that one.
Yeah, exactly. So that was October of 2019. And then obviously we know what happened in 2020 in the winter there. And so now I've got 4 to 6 months of no physio, 4 to 6 months of not working directly with my coaches. And again, when we tore my foundation apart, like, I had to relearn how to run with a different technique. So obviously that whole process just got slowed. Like, I was making great progress, and then it just got slowed down. I didn't see a trainer. I was working. Luckily, I had a gym set up in my garage. So even though it was -10 outside, I was in there with gloves and a toque and mitts on, still getting my lift in, and I would film it, and then I would send it to my trainer, who would get back to me 3 days later, and we'd evaluate it. And then I'd have to remember what they said when I did that same lift again the next week. So everything just kind of got delayed. And so when team tryouts came, the other worst thing was I didn't push a sled because the ice house was closed and we were barred from it. Like, we weren't allowed to push in the ice house, which is an amazing facility here. So when team tryouts came the next year, I was not ready to go. And I fully take responsibility for that. Like, I was not ready to go. Then they said, you know what, doesn't matter, we're not going anyway. So Team Canada said, they were thinking about sending us on tour anyway. We had medical exemptions to go and compete. All the Europeans were competing, and they just said, you know what, we're going to hold our athletes back. So now I've gone from taking a year off to it ended up being 22 months between my international competitions. And I wasn't feeling confident getting ready to go, but you know what? This was last year. It didn't matter because it was still a year to go for the Olympics. And got my races in enough to be qualified. You need what's called a 532 for this year, meaning I kind of got to keep my driver's license, my bobsled driver's license, and be eligible. And I knew that the up and coming girls were going to be ready, and it was going to be a battle. So I worked my butt off this year, and I kind of threw everything I had in it. Like, I lost a lot of my sponsorship because I wasn't competing. So I used, like, you know what, whatever debt I need to go into to afford and make sure that I'm ready to go this year. I'm not going to work because everyone else isn't working, and I need to make sure that I'm ready to go. And, come the fall, we got told 5 days before our selections that what our selection criteria was, and it was based on push rank, and I didn't have a chance anyway. So it was a little bit disheartening because I did feel like I was ready to go. I was in way better shape than I was in 2018. I was the healthiest I've been. I didn't quite beat my PB in the ice house, but I was 300ths away, you know, like it was not like I was way out of range. And that kind of just shut the door on me. But then they told me to stick around because in case somebody got sick or injured, then I was next up.
Yeah.
So when you give someone a bone like that, like, hey, like, okay, so you're saying there's still a chance, I'm going to take it.
Yeah.
There was no communication other than like, you can compete on the development circuit and try and qualify a spot that way. And maybe you'll get a chance. And the year went by and I never got my chance. And I'm happy that those girls did really well. And I'm going to be cheering my butt off for them in the Olympics. And I'm excited to see how they do, but it just like, it hurts when you do everything in your power to be ready and it just still wasn't good enough, you know?
Well, for sure. And as you explained, even just at the beginning of your career, the struggle isn't just, physical, it's mental, it's financial, it's all of that time consuming. And as you described that story of the last 2 years, I mean, how did you not just at some point throw in the towel and say, this is just too much? I could go and, live a happy life, just going to the gym like every other normal person instead of trying to, rebuild my body for an elite sport that how many pilots do they send to the Olympics? There's like 3 out of 4 of what is like, there's not that many people out of this country who are even capable of doing what you're doing. And you're fighting for 1 spot or 2 spots.
Yeah. So we got to send 2 in the brand new sport of monobob and 3 in 2-man. And this is the first time ever we've had 4 girls that probably on any given day could challenge for those spots.
Yeah, which I guess it's a testament to how the sport's developed, but it's frustrating when you're one of those 4. You know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly.
It's like I joked. I said to my wife yesterday, we were watching the snowboarding. It's like the Olympics. You turn it on and whatever's there, you kind of get a little taste of something that you don't usually watch. And we're watching it, and the Canadian woman, I think, finished 5th or something. Oh, that's so disappointing. And you think to yourself, no, she's like 5th in the world. What are you talking about? She's, that's insane when you think about the scale of it. I want to get to the Olympics here in a second because I do want your perspective on what the women I know are going through. But let's go back to 2018 for a second. You make it to the Olympics. What does that accomplishment mean as an athlete, as a person? And just describe that for me. What's it like to get, first to know you're going to go to the Olympics and the anticipation of it, and then to arrive there? What's that feel like?
Yeah. So 2018 was the first time that Canada had ever sent 3 sleds. So it was a pretty amazing feat for our team because we kind of did it in unison and we were all so proud of each other. And it meant that 8 people got to go from our team instead of just 5. So that was 3 more people, even though they didn't compete in the races, they were still there. They still got to walk in opening ceremonies. So there was 8 of us that got to go and we were just so proud to be that part. I was always sitting in a good spot. I had done pretty well in that year and I was sitting like 6th in the world the entire season. So it was stressful. It was stressful trying to make sure we all got there and like work as a team. But just as soon as we got, it was official. It was an amazing feeling. It was so special. And going to those Olympic Games, like I feel for the people who this is their first Olympics because the experience they're getting in China is not what the Olympics are all about. Like it was, we had 225. That was the biggest team that Canada had ever sent to the Olympics. And just like being in the building, screaming Canada, like we were shaking it from underneath before we got to walk in those opening ceremonies. And I'm just watching and I'm so happy that those guys looked legit in that Lululemon kit, but nice. You couldn't tell who anyone was because they all got big masks on and they got their hats down. And I know they were like, their elevators actually say like no talking, like in the elevators, because they just don't want people to be like opening their mouths basically. And I got my best friends all came out and my family, my uncles, like I just had a huge cheering squad that got to be a part of it and take it all in and really get the full experience in Korea. And so I think for me, just the Olympics, I'd say in 2018 were the best month of my life. And the best part was competing and actually like being at the pinnacle of my sport and reaching, that was a huge goal for me, is wanting to be the best in the world at something. And the next part was walking in opening ceremonies, because I think that for me was the difference maker. Like that was watching it was the London opening ceremonies that really inspired me to be like, no, I actually really want the opportunity to to wear that big maple leaf. And I definitely was not the kind of basketball player that was going to have that opportunity. So, and then the third best part, I'd say, was the 4-day party that ensued when I finished my races, and just being a part of a crew of athletes that were done all their events and we were allowed to stay the whole time. So like going and cheering on other teammates and in their events and getting to take that in, and just living, like being so high on life and just so ecstatic of being a part of this group of people was just so special. And it was just an overall great opportunity, and the Olympics will always be the Olympics. And I think that's why people are so excited. But right now, what these athletes are going through in Beijing is not even close to that. So I do feel, and I hope a lot of people who are first timers will have the opportunity to go back and get the real experience next time.
Yeah. So just on that, what is it like? So you get in there, you get to the opening ceremony, which is, I'm sure, just a huge party, and it's super exciting. How many days from that point to the moment you had to be competing do you sort of turn your focus into game mode, let's say? And how does that window work?
Yeah, so it's different. Every sport's different. So for me, at the last Olympics, we only had the 2 women event. We did not have monobob.
Right.
That's a brand new sport that's getting debuted this year. So I was in Korea a couple days before, and this is the same schedule as these guys are doing right now, actually. So they got on the ice 2 days prior to the opening ceremony. So they had to be there on the 26th of January, with the Olympics starting on the 4th. So they had to be there. They had to get these 3 COVID tests. And then that was the kind of the clearance where you're like entered into the village. And then they had 2 days of training on the ice, and then nothing, because now it goes luges on the ice and skeletons on the ice. And then the bobs get on later next week. So I know for me, when we were there last time, I didn't compete until day 9. So I was the first 3 days luckily I had Heather Moyes, who is an Olympic legend, and she kind of laid the ground rules for us, which I really appreciated. Like she had been through it. She knew what was really important. So the first 3 days we went to events. There was no, and I'd say like opening ceremonies is a celebration. It's not a party. Nobody's partying because everyone hasn't competed yet, so everyone's kind of like crushing water bottles and focused. And yes, you're taking it in, but you're definitely still in athlete mode. So then the first 3 days we went to a couple events. Like I got to see Johnny Moe and Caitlin Laws win gold, and went and watched the team figure skating event, which was incredible, and take that in. And then after 3 days, we just like shut it down. I competed late at night, so my races were at 9 o'clock. I take about 200 milligrams of caffeine before I race, so I knew that we weren't going to be sleeping until like 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning. So we actually just got used to that. So for the first couple of days of the Olympics, I was sleeping until noon, 1 p.m. Sounds lazy, but like you're doing it on purpose, right? They're trying to be strategic, getting ready for acclimatized for what your race is going to be. And then we'd stay up and we'd just watch events during the day in our PJs and our onesies in Team Canada House, sitting on beanbag chairs and just hanging out around the village, because I barely had any workouts left to do, because you're tapering, you're already, the work has been done and you're just trying to rest and be ready to go. So there were a couple of days where I had small workouts to do, or a track warm up or something like that. And then the days that we were on the track all day. So you had to bus the 45 minutes to the track. You had to be there 3 hours early, which is earlier than you normally are. Usually we're there like 2 hours early. You do your 2 training runs, and then you do your sled work and your sled prep and get everything ready for that. And all the materials had to be rechecked. They get checked at the beginning of the season and you don't have to worry about it again, but at the Olympics you have to recheck them again, and then you polish your runners. And yeah, it's just like a process. And then you're getting ready to race, and then so it's like 12-hour days basically when you're on the ice, and you get 3 days of official training before your 2 days of racing, so 5 days on the ice. So that's basically like all you do. Like I couldn't even tell you what else happened during the Olympics during those 5 days that I was on the ice and practicing and training, just because it was like so blinders on, focused on what I had to do. And then you spent the 4 days after celebrating everyone else.
Yeah. And as a pilot, I know, you must have just like a mental map of what that track is in your head. Are you seeing it when you're like sleeping? Can you see every turn and every corner and what the line you want to follow is? Like, as a pilot, it's a different kind of thing. I mean, let's just pretend people don't know anything about bobsled. In your case, with women's bobsled, you've got two athletes. One is pushing, one is jumping in the front and then piloting. How does it work? Let's just pretend they know nothing about bobsled.
So you got to think about it. You've heard the saying, it takes 10,000 hours to perfect your craft. So like any sport you grew up as a kid, you're outside for 4 hours shooting pucks or kicking a soccer ball at a garage like I did. But in bobsled, you can't do that. Like you're going down the track and I'm in each corner for like a second. So for me to get to 10,000 hours, it's physically impossible because the G forces we have in our body, like there's no way that I could have 10,000 hours of seat time in a bobsled. Like it's just so unrealistic. I don't want that much time, to be honest. So that's where visualization comes in, and the mental component of being a pilot is just so important. So that's me sometimes putting my computer on a coffee table and sitting underneath it. And so it's at eye level and watching a POV and just going through. If you watch bobsled and you see any of the pilots in the warm-ups, you'll see them. They look like they're dancing with their hands. They're doing mental runs. They're going down the track. They're doing their mental runs. They're figuring out, if they're mentally mapping out, if they're going into a corner on the left side, what they're going to do versus going on the right side and fighting those pressures and feeling it. So that's a huge component of what we do. I would say that absolutely. Do I do mind runs in my sleep? I do. And I hate it. And it's something that I had to work with a sports psych to make sure that I wasn't doing it, because that is not the time to be doing your mind runs. That means you're stressing it. So every pilot is different in terms of like how many they do. I find that the older I got in my career and the more seat time I actually had, the less mind runs I did. But when I was a developing pilot, I was probably doing 100 a day.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's not a very complicated vehicle, let's call it. There's no steering wheel, right? You've got some string and some blades. Like how does that work?
So it's a lever cable pulley system. So it's just, I pull the right rope, it turns right. I pull the left rope, it turns left. The whole thing for me is not actually about creating a steer. It's about resisting the centripetal force that the sled is experiencing as it's going through. So you got to think when you're in your vehicle and you're going on an on-ramp onto a freeway and how you're kind of accelerating through and you can feel the car fight you back. Basically, I'm fighting that pressure, just holding it in my hand, and I'm trying to give a little and take a little as I go. The more you steer, the more friction you create, the more you actually slow the sled down. And that's what the opposite we want to do. We want to do the least amount of steering possible on the way down, but obviously you got to keep it on forerunners. So there's a fine line. Sometimes you end up doing what we call the bow and arrow, where you're pulling it all the way back, trying to save it. But it's not complicated, but learning a track and learning where the pressure is and learning the fast way down is definitely the complication difficult part.
Oh, for sure. So this is, we talked about how this year ended for you. Is this it for you in bobsled? Are you retiring? Can you do that? Is this something you could just sort of turn off, or where are you at with all of it?
Yeah, I think so. It's kind of like I never actually officially announced my retirement, but it's kind of been announced that I'm done now. So because I was relieved of my duties for not being a spare to go to China here. But I'm done competing. Whether I return to the sport is still up in the air. I've talked to a couple teams have approached me, but if I'd be interested to coach, and in that capacity, I'm definitely open to it. I'm not saying I'm going to do it for sure, but I'll always be around bobsled. I think I'm a board member for the community club program that there is here in Calgary, and I just always want to stay close to the sport. I think that I'm at a point in my life where I just am craving some financial stability. So I think it's time for me to move on and develop a career that I can feel confident building a life towards.
Totally. And I guess to that, it's like, what is next for you? You've already got yourself involved in, I know, several charities, and you're a huge advocate for women in sport and just sport in general. What's next for you?
Yeah, I always thought that when I was done bobsled, I'd apply to med school again. But now that I'm this far, I'm like, there's no chance that I'm going back to school. I went back to school actually 2 years ago, or 3 years ago now, and got a certificate in business through Queen's through one of the scholarships that the COC offered us, which was pretty incredible. So I finally realized, it took me till I was in my 30s to realize that like I've always loved sports so much. Why am I trying to not make a career out of it? So I don't know what that capacity is going to look like. I'm applying to be in sport broadcasting. I'm going to be doing some radio here during the Olympics in the next 2 weeks. I'm going to be doing some analyst on for a bobsled panel on CTV, just breaking down the races and how they go. But my really true passion, I think, is in hockey. So I'll be applying to some teams to work on my experiences on the sponsorship and marketing side. So maybe be involved in some capacity of that. And if not, hopefully be in front of a camera somewhere and being a broadcast or a host.
Awesome. Well, we really look forward to whatever's next for you. And I just want to say, obviously thanks for joining us with this one, and your insight and your passion is inspiring. It's awesome to see. If I guess we'll end it this way. If you could say one thing to some kid out there, maybe a little girl who's watching the Olympics this time around, right? And she's watching bobsleigh, or I don't know, one of those other suicidal sports, sliding down a hill. I don't know how you guys have the courage to do it, but she's watching it and she's thinking, that's kind of interesting. Maybe I should do that. What would you say to her?
If there's anything you want to do, go do it. And don't let anyone tell you can't do it. I've heard that so many times throughout my career, and basically everything in that, it started when I was younger, is girls don't do that, or girls can't have a career in that. And as I got older, it was just, oh, you're not qualified, or you don't have the potential, oh, you don't have this, you don't have that. And for me, I think it's just constantly about proving people wrong. And because if you want it bad enough, you will make it happen.
Awesome. Thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate it.
Well, thanks so much for having me.
All right. So there you have it. That's our show for this week. Thank you to Alysia Rissling for joining us. Just an awesome conversation about her journey, her experience, and obviously some of her struggles. The bureaucracy of sport comes up again. I know we talked a lot about the struggles of the Olympic movement and all of that. But in the end, as I said, I do think that it's complicated. It's a mixed thing, and listening to her talk, you can hear the passion and the importance this sport of bobsleigh has meant to her life. But it's also not the be all end all. She's on to new and big exciting things as she moves into sort of retirement from piloting a bobsled, and hopefully pursuing a career in sports journalism. So we'll look forward to her, sharing her own opinion and perspective. We didn't talk to her about it, but I do know she's a huge Oilers fan. So maybe the next time we have her on the show, she can give us a breakdown of how the Oilers season's going. And we'll get to that. We made our Super Bowl picks. Elliott's standing by his beloved Bengals. You still happy with that pick, Elliott? All this, an hour later?
Like I said, more controversial in 2022.
All right, there it is. We'll leave it there. And thanks, Elliott. Thank you, Alysia. And thanks everybody for listening. It was a great show. Hit us up on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. And share with your friends. Subscribe, follow, all that fun stuff. All right, that's Hat Trick. Hat Trick is a member of the Ordinary Podcasting Network. It's produced every week by Jordan Dowler-Coltman and Braden Dowler-Coltman. You can follow us on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. Thanks for listening. You should just turn the light off. I'm on Zoom. No, but Elliott can see me. Come see Elliott. Look.
Hello, Elliott.
How's it going?
The Ordinary Podcasting Network wishes to acknowledge that the lands on which our conversations take place include Treaty 6 territory, the traditional meeting ground and home for many Indigenous peoples, including the Cree, Dene, Saulteaux, Blackfoot, Métis, and the Nakota Sioux peoples, as well as the unceded territories of the Coast Salish peoples, including the territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations.
We acknowledge the many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit, whose footsteps have marked these lands for generations. And we extend our appreciation for the opportunity to live, create, and share stories on these territories.
The Ordinary Podcasting Network intends to engage in conversations and dialogue which acknowledge that reconciliation is not a destination, but a journey, and that we remain committed to practicing our craft in a decolonized space.